Alberta is considering a number of different routes for its proposed pipeline project. That's according to documents obtained this week by CBC News. All of it offering the first specific glimpse into where this pipeline could be located. Alberta has been considering 3 pipeline routes that would run to the northern coast of British Columbia. The province also highlighted a number of potential oil ports along BC's coast, but British Columbia Premier David Eby says he wasn't informed about any of it.
This is the first suggestion I'm seeing of potential routes. The province of Alberta, the federal government, and the taxpayer-funded company that runs the Trans Mountain Pipeline have been doing this work. British Columbia has not been at the table. I won't speculate about whether or not these are actually the routes. I don't know.
I spoke to Alberta's former Deputy Minister of Energy, Grant Sprague, about all of this earlier this week. He now serves as a counsel at Blue Rock Law. Grant Sprague, it's good to meet you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure to be here, David.
We knew generally on the northern routes where Daniel Smith and others were looking at maybe going, but we have some specifics now. What stands out for you in those 3 options that are presented?
What I think is most interesting is that there's not a lot that's new. And the fact that really the choices are going to Prince Rupert or going through Kitimat, and that's a rough approximation, strikes me as very similar challenges that we knew about before, and the choices look much the same. And all the challenges that are associated with both of them as well.
So if the routes are pretty much the same and the challenges are pretty much the same, why would the outcome be different on a northern route this time?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question. And I think the answer for our provincial government must be that the federal government is interested in moving this forward. I also think that our provincial government is understanding that they're going to need to do a different job with respect to engagement with those along the route than perhaps had been done before.
So far, though, the resistance, and look, the documents do show another route to the south. I want to talk about that in a second. But so far, the reaction of a lot of the coastal First Nations is no, and we don't want the ban lifted. You've seen the resistance from the British Columbia government that if you upset the First Nations with this project, it can revoke the social license for the existing projects that British Columbia has in the pipeline here on LNG and other things. Do you see a path through that? It's difficult to see it from here, but I'm no expert. How do you view it?
Yeah, in my view, I think the challenge is on the terrestrial side is finding that path through communities that are interested in supporting economic development and being part of the conversation, both from an equity perspective, but also from serious impact and input on the design as it's going forward. And I think when we think about the oceans, we be really clear about how do we address those significant concerns that have been raised about the passage of tankers out of, from my perspective, Prince Rupert, that avoids the Hecate Strait and gets into all of those challenges and looks a lot more like a clear shot to Asia.
So essentially cobble together permission across a parcels of land where you can get alignment with the First Nations in return for sharing in that prosperity. But that still requires the federal government to lift the tanker ban on the North Coast. I know you avoid the strait, but it is still in an ecologically sensitive area, and it's an old-fashioned conservation fight for some of the First Nations in that area. That is still the hurdle that needs to be cleared there.
I think that's right, David. And it strikes me that if I was giving advice to the provincial government, it would be about how do we make the most limited ask we can to the federal government with respect to the tanker ban. You know, it would be great, I guess, if there was no tanker ban from many people's perspectives here. The reality is it is important. So how do we help the federal government find a path that politically is going to be palatable to them, but that achieves the outcome? And so that's a compromise. And I think the Alberta government's got to be open to that.
Is that limiting it to specific routes, limiting it to a certain number of tanker transshipments each and every year, each and every month? Like, how do you calibrate something like that?
Yeah, I think there's space for that. I think, you know, we've seen a bit of this happen with Vancouver. And it is a question of, do you need to have special pilotage put in place? Right. You could think about it in terms of numbers of ships. If this is a very large pipeline, though, you're going to need to have a large number of tankers go through so that you can move product. But I think there's ways that we can ensure that that's done in a safe fashion. And allowing people to participate in the design of those safety measures, I think, is a really important piece. Is one way they can be heard, and another way that they can participate.
Okay, so a partial exemption rather than a revocation of the entire ban, and then with a harbor pilot authority leading them in and that sort of a thing to get them in safely and out, and with local knowledge of the waters. The other option the document shows is a fourth route going down to Vancouver or the Vancouver area. And when Premier Smith was here in Ottawa for the Canada Strong and Free Network, she talked about 5 routes being looked at. What is your sense of going south, getting into Vancouver, where we might need some dredging of harbors, going to places like Roberts Bank? Is that a more politically saleable and economically viable option, or is it's got to go north because of the quicker access to the Asian markets?
No, I think it's an interesting proposal. You could certainly go south. We know how to get there. I think it's interesting to think about what would need to be done in the Vancouver area and what would be the degree of concerns or opportunities that you would see with that. And I think we're studying, and to your point, if you're going to move a substantial amount of more oil through Vancouver, you probably need to do it at a new terminal, which is maybe on Roberts Bank, but that's new development, and it will bring its issues with it as well. So it's not it doesn't simply get rid of all the problems of the North. It's just different problems.
Right. And so, I mean, how do they thread this needle then? Look, the referendum and all of that uncertainty is one thing. There is the lack of a private proponent at this point in time, though Enbridge in particular has been shifting its public commentary from a hard no to of course we might back a pipeline if there's some certainty. How do you get the certainty, and can you get the certainty to hit that shovels in the ground target of September 2027 that the Prime Minister and the Premier signed off on in the MOU?
Sounds to me like there's got to be an awful lot of work done with communities, with partners, to get the comfort and get the agreement that this is going to make a great deal of sense. So that's an awful lot of moving parts to line up in a rush. From my perspective, the amount of effort to build those relationships, and I'm thinking now about communities, is really substantial. And I'm nervous about the idea that that can be done quickly. I'm not saying it needs to take forever, but I really worry about people who think that that can be done very quickly. It needs to be respectful and thoughtful. Equally, with your commercial partners or those who might wish to take it on, they're going to need to build those relationships as well and be seen to be a key part of them. So that's a lot of work to be done by a lot of people in a relatively short period of time.
That seems, I don't want to say impossible, because nothing is impossible, but that seems extremely difficult to do by September of next year, does it not? I mean, look, you can start all kinds of work on the Alberta side of the border, I'm sure, but on the end point in British Columbia to the coast, the calendar seems rushed. I
think it's really tight. To be very honest, in order to get the approval through. There will be lots of questions to be asked. This is, as I understand, the idea is a very large pipe. I think it's a 42-inch pipe that's being designed. That's a big pipe with a lot of product going through it. That is by itself going to raise different issues or concerns, where you're putting in pump stations and all of those questions. And, I'm mindful, David, that in particular, if you're going north, but it's also an issue for the Fraser River. These are important salmon habitat zones, and people are going to be very concerned about what are the appropriate mitigation measures.
Grant Sprague, former Alberta Deputy Minister of Energy. It was great to have you on the show. I hope you'll come back as we get more details and information on this. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure, David. Thanks ever so much.